Alright, Ronan MMA, welcome back to the channel. Now, in about 3 weeks' time, Charles Oliveira will try to get his belt back off of Islam Makhachev at UFC 294 in the main event, and I've been watching a lot of both of their old fights and the fight that they had with one another and Charles Oliveira's fight after that, and I've been trying to come up with ways or things that I think that Charles Oliveira can do differently in order to win, or at the very least do better in the rematch than he did the first time around. Now, obviously, I'm not the smartest person in the world. There's a lot of people that know fighting better than I do, so take all of what I say with a grain of salt. With that being said, though, I want to go over, I've came up with 3 major points that I think Charles Oliveira could do differently or even do more of that I think could get him a better result in this rematch, and I want to go over those in today's video. So we are going to start with the very first point that I have came up with, which is, alright, now something that Daniel Cormier actually said on commentary, which to me, after watching this fight back a couple of times, completely rings true, is that Islam Makhachev does not want to grab a leg of Charles Oliveira's. He doesn't want to run back a single or even go for a double leg takedown. He wants to trip him. That is the only way that he wants to take him down, probably in an attempt to protect his neck. Completely understandable, considering Charles Oliveira is unbelievably fast to wrap up guillotines and things like that off of poorly shot takedowns. This was pretty evident after watching it back, because I saw Charles Oliveira in that fight throw multiple front kicks right up the middle off of his lead leg, and all Islam Makhachev would do every single time he threw it was parried it to the outside and take a step back. He does not want to catch a leg. They were all like, almost every single time, I felt as though Islam Makhachev could have scooped up his leg and ran it back for a takedown had he wanted to, but he doesn't want to. He wants to kind of circle parry it to the outside while stepping back. He does not want to grab a hold of Charles Oliveira's legs. So Charles Oliveira, while he was throwing them in the first fight, and fairly consistently, I actually think that he should throw more of them, because one, it creates a situation where you're pushing Islam Makhachev back, or at the very least keeping him on the end of your range. Not just that, because I just said he circle parries to the outside and takes a step back, you're forcing him backwards. Even if it's not immediate pressure, it will force him back a little bit, and it kind of negates the pressure that Islam Makhachev likes to implement on some of his opponents. Now, also what it can do is create a situation where if Charles Oliveira starts to land those to the body pretty consistently, and they eventually do take a toll on Islam Makhachev's body, or they start to bug him or whatever, dude, and he either attempts to catch the leg and run it back for a takedown, you potentially create a situation where it's almost a panic shot, and Charles Oliveira could potentially wrap up a submission off of that, or at the very least defend a poorly shot takedown. Or he starts trying to grab it, and you're able to set him up with something else after the fact if you're able to pull your leg away in time and not allow him to actually hook it and grab it. So that's one thing that I think Charles Oliveira could do differently. Something else that I'd like him to mix up with those, however, is the round kick, the beautiful head kick that he threw against Beneil Dariush multiple times. He actually threw one, if I'm not mistaken, against Islam Makhachev. He doesn't really want to catch those either. He blocks and steps away from the side that kick is coming from, and it would just create a good mix-up of things, so you're not just constantly throwing the same attack up the middle. And also, you can kind of wear out the arms of Islam Makhachev, and I feel as though if Charles Oliveira just keeps him at range and keeps Islam Makhachev on the back foot, having to move laterally, trying to get out of off of the fence against Charles Oliveira, you might even create a situation where, one, he starts to tire, because even counter strikers, you don't want to be on the back foot all of the time. It does get exhausting constantly moving backwards or even side to side, and or after blocking a bunch of those round kicks to the head, his arms might start to feel it. Do you know what I mean? And then he might have a little less strength in the grappling or clinch scenarios. He might have a little less pop on his shot. So even if they're not landing per se, it's not really something you can attempt to catch. Even if you wanted to, for that matter, you need to address a head kick with a block, preferably with both hands. Islam Makhachev doesn't usually get his second hand across, but he is really good at getting that one arm up there, usually his left hand. And I feel if Charles mixes round kicks to the head up off of his back leg with the front kicks up the middle to the body off of his lead leg, it can keep Islam Makhachev at bay at the end of his range, and also backing up, because that was something that we saw. Islam Makhachev was like almost more than willing to stay backing up against Charles Oliveira. He didn't attempt to pressure a whole lot. Islam Makhachev's striking, in my opinion, I know a lot of people don't like him, but in my opinion, Islam Makhachev's striking is underrated in a few different aspects. So first, his defense. After getting KO'd, I would imagine, took a toll on him. He is, for the most part, relatively extremely defensively responsible. I know I just added a bunch of qualifiers to that, but he just is, dude. And something else, well, the reason I added a bunch of qualifiers, actually, I'll just let you guys know, is because when he's moving forward, when Islam Makhachev is the one going first, he's less defensively responsible than when he is on the back foot, when he is the one that is trying to counter, which is what he did against Charles Oliveira. And that's the other aspect of his striking game that I think is pretty underrated, is his counters. Now, when he's moving forward and he's the one going first, you can see the hook start to get sloppy. You can see his feet getting out of position and things like that. Something that is just like, if you didn't grow up from the young age that they did grappling, striking, it's just something that it's a hard habit to break. Do you know what I mean? But when he is countering, when he hit Charles Oliveira with that right hand counter, the beautiful right check hook that he landed, he is very tight. His hand is up here. Everything's nice and tight. It's not looping, but when he moves forward, it's not really the same. So you could maybe wear down his defenses by doing this. And I know that Charles Oliveira loves to go forward a lot, but something I would like to do, or something I would like him to do, pardon me, is to keep it his approach a little more measured. You don't need to get him out of there in the first round, you know what I mean? And I know that that's why we love Charles Oliveira, because that's just what the fuck he does. He goes out there and immediately is on the attack, start to finish. But I feel as though if he's a little more measured in his approach this time around, mixing up the kicks to keep Islam at bay and things like this, you can wear out his arms, you can wear out his gas tank even just by making him constantly move backwards and laterally against the fence and things like that, and also create a situation where he might actually panic shoot. So that's the first thing I think, is the front kicks up the middle, more round kicks to the head, mix those up, keep him at bay, and potentially create a scenario where Islam Makhachev has to make a mistake rather than you offering a mistake for him to capitalize on. Now, the second adjustment and or thing that I think Charles Oliveira could do differently in this fight is something that Charles does really well against other guys, because he is not a counter striker. He likes to be the one going first, and when somebody is actually throwing against him, he's not usually looking for counters. He's just trying to block, okay? He doesn't ever really, stand in the pocket and throw a big counter hook off of somebody else's hook. He just wants to make sure that he blocks that shot, probably because he does know that he can get hurt, and he has been hurt in almost all of his recent fights. You know what I mean? Something that he's really good at off of that is using his forward momentum to then crash into his opponents, land big shots in the clinch. He'll tie up with them, land a big knee, and he's already moving forward, so there's even more force behind that shot. He'll land an elbow up top. We saw him do this a ton against Dustin Poirier, which I think could have ultimately resulted in Poirier being tired and unable to defend grappling scenarios that he might have been otherwise. You could tell he was landing big shots. He started curling up Poirier's body every time he would land one of those big knees to the body. Now, he doesn't really have that luxury with Islam. Islam wants to grapple with him. Islam wants him to crash forward. And this might sound crazy, but something that I want Charles Oliveira to do, or that I think could potentially actually help him when they tie up in the clinch, because it will happen. There's no way he's going to be able to stay away from that position for the full 25 minutes if it goes that long, is initiate a takedown first. And the reason I say that is in the first round, there were two ground entanglements, initiations that happened. One of them was Charles Oliveira, and he pulled guard. That's something that I'll get back to in a second. The second time, Islam Makhachev was able to land a nice trip on him, or a throw, whatever you want to call it, okay, up against the cage, was able to press Charles up against the cage, so he wasn't able to mount really any offense against Islam, and he was able to control him for the rest of the round. In round two, I feel like this was an adjustment that he made. They clinched up. Charles Oliveira immediately got a over-under position, okay? And he went for a trip this time on Islam Makhachev, which forced Islam to address something and defend something. Also, kind of created a situation where he had to regain his balance. So when they did finally end up against the cage in a clinch scenario, Charles Oliveira already had a really strong overhook so that he could whizzer if he needed to, and he was also hand fighting with Islam Makhachev immediately with Islam's one free hand. He did not allow Islam to lock his hands or get double unders or anything like that. He was, and virtue of that, and this is what Charles up against the cage, he can create these knees from anywhere because he had Islam's arm out like this. Islam's right side of his body was completely open. He landed a few really good cheeky knees. And actually, before they started standing back up against the cage after his attempted takedown. He landed a nice cheeky elbow in there. So I feel like if he can initiate a takedown as opposed to waiting for Islam to initiate one on him and then him being the one defensive, he can create a situation where Islam Makhachev has to be defensive immediately, has to address something immediately, has to regain his balance, and just isn't in the best or most advantageous position where he can then land a throw or a trip on you. Okay, so I know that it sounds wild. I don't know why anybody would want to try and take down Islam Makhachev, but I feel like, one, these guys don't really like being put on their backs, although I would imagine Islam's got some pretty strong attacks off of his back. But I'm not even saying I want Charles to get the takedown. I just want him to attempt them so that Islam has to address them. And because after that situation, because Charles was able to get into a position where he was relatively safe from a trip, Islam ended up disengaging because he wasn't going to land anything, and Charles Oliveira was landing good knees to the body. Now, Islam landed a couple of his own, but he wasn't able to do what he ultimately wanted to do, which is take Charles Oliveira down and, you know, smother him and smash him on the ground. Now, earlier I spoke about how Charles in the first ground exchange, he pulled guard, or at the very least just pulled Islam on top of him. It was pretty much a guard pull. He did end up in full guard. If he does feel that he's going to get taken down, I think I would rather Charles Oliveira pull guard than try to defend and end up getting taken down in a different geographical location of the octagon, okay? Because in that first ground exchange, Charles Oliveira completely neutralized Islam Makhachev. Islam wasn't really able to land anything from top position. Now, he was just in full guard, right? Charles Oliveira was able to keep his guard, but something he was able to do, it wasn't up against the fence. He had a ton of room to move back, a ton of room to create leverage. He was throwing up arm bars, throwing up triangles, things like this, just making Islam a... Dude, even if you don't want the sub, you're making him be defensive. You're not allowing him to think about what he's going to do to advance position, to move forward, to attempt a submission on you. He had to defend something, and Charles Oliveira essentially neutralized him. Islam landed a few shots from top, but Charles also landed a few shots from bottom. He landed a few good elbows, things like this, which he's very good at when he can lean back and then create the leverage needed to move forward. He kind of uses his shoulders as like a springboard when he wants to come forward and throw shots off of his back. In the second exchange, as I said earlier, it was a trip or a throw off of the fence, and then Islam Makhachev immediately repositions himself, pushes Charles Oliveira's head up against the fence, and for the rest of that round, he was able to then control Charles Oliveira because he was able to kind of stack him. Charles had no room to move, no real room to like kind of leverage his legs in any particular way, and Islam Makhachev was able to control him for the rest of that round and actually land more damage than he did in the first ground exchange, which didn't last that long, and it was because of the guard of Charles Oliveira. He has a very active guard, and he's not just trying to look for subs, he's also being offensive with his hands and his elbows. But he needs that space to move, kind of like the way Israel Adesanya needs space to move in the striking department. He needs space to lean back so he can pull his hooks in closer and things like this. Charles Oliveira kind of needs to do the same thing on the ground. He needs to be able to lean back in order to create dangerous scenarios for his opponent, which the first time around he was able to do because he pulled guard, so he determined where I'm going to hit the mat. Do you know what I mean? And they were a good few feet away from the cage, so he didn't have to worry about Islam just picking him up and moving him there. The second time around, however, he was trying to defend. He ended up getting taken down anyways, and then virtue of that, squished up against the fence and controlled for the rest of the round. So I would really like to see him, if he can't shoot a takedown, or not shoot, but like attempt a trip or a throw immediately, because something else that he's really good at is he can maneuver positions in the clinch faster than almost anybody. Islam Makhachev, maybe once he gets a position, is much better at keeping it and controlling it and then using your weight against you and things like that, but Charles Oliveira is able to sneak his arms out in ways and land shots over the top and shit like this very, very quickly. So I feel like if he can initiate a takedown, force Islam to defend, then he can get a better position for himself and either disengage or at the very least negate Islam Makhachev's attack or pull guard rather than being taken down up against the cage, right? So that you have room to move, I mean, dude, the other way around, went dyslexia for a minute, room to move and leverage yourself to land shots from the bottom, submission attempts, things like that, which he wasn't able to do when he was pushed up against the cage. Now, third thing I want Charles Oliveira to do differently, or that I would like to see him do differently, or whatever, is I don't want any jumping shit. None of it, dude. I don't like it anyways, but he was successful with it in a few different fights. Now, he landed those good jumping front kicks to the face against Kevin Lee. He almost landed one against Dustin Poirier. He landed a few good jumping switch knees to the body against Dustin Poirier, actually. So against a lot of his opponents, those attacks are successful. And look, this is part of the reason we fucking love Charles Oliveira, because he throws wild shit. He's fun. He's reckless. He wants to get you out of there as quickly as he possibly can. This dude is not trying to score rounds and win a decision. He wants to fuck you up, and that's why we love Charles Oliveira. However, as I said in the first point, I would like to see him be a little more measured in his approach this time around, because that little jumping entry that he does so often got him dropped in their last fight and ultimately led to the decision, or the submission, pardon me, because we saw off of multiple ground exchanges that Islam Makhachev wasn't really able to advance position. If Charles Oliveira had a guard on him, Islam wasn't really passing. Now, maybe had he had 5-10 minutes of control time, we might see Charles Oliveira's guard start to open up a little bit. Maybe Islam's able to pass into half guard or side control. Maybe, but we don't know that. We can only go off of the ground exchanges that we did see. And in the first few, Islam couldn't really do anything. Now, the end of the first round, he did better because he was able to squish him up against the cage, but he wasn't really able to advance position, get to a dominant position. Whereas when he dropped him with that beautiful check right hook, he immediately hopped into half guard, got the arm triangle, hopped into side control, and that's a wrap. Once you're rocked, your body is not going to respond the same way. So you can even be telling your body, like, no, we need to do this in order to defend what he's doing, and it's just not going to respond the same way because you're hurt, you're out of it, right? I don't want Charles Oliveira jumping in like that. First of all, it creates a scenario where Islam Makhachev can clinch with him, can wrap him up because he's crashing forward. He has a lot of forward momentum and things like that, but also because of what I spoke about earlier. Islam Makhachev is unbelievably defensively responsible off the back foot when he's looking for a counter, and that is what we saw. He'll just move back, right? Sometimes in a straight line, sometimes he'll angle off, but he's not fucking with that shit. He's not going to stand in there and, like, he'll move back and see what you're doing, and then he lands a beautiful check right hook that hurts Charles Oliveira. That also creates more forward momentum for you. So if your opponent does land a counter shot on you, it's going to do more damage because there's going to be more force behind it, or, you know, you're creating more force going into it. So that's something that I would like to see him get away from. I don't want the jumping front kicks or the crane kicks, whatever you want to call them. I don't want the jumping switch knees to the body, because you don't have the luxury of getting hurt and going to the ground to recover like he does against all of his other opponents. Do you know what I mean? If Islam Makhachev hurts him and Charles Oliveira tries to go to his back, Islam's jumping on him and he's going to sub him, or he's going to ground and pound him out, or what have you. Whereas with Justin, with Dustin, with Michael Chandler even, Michael Chandler was a little more willing to go to the ground with him than any of the other guys. But with a lot of these guys, man, he can just fall to his back and nobody wants to come and fuck with him on the ground. Islam Makhachev wants to. You don't have that luxury. You need to be more responsible. I know we love Charles Oliveira because he's reckless and crazy and he's just all offense, but I want him to be a little bit more measured. So I want the front kicks up the middle, the round kicks to the head, keep him at range. No jumping in, dude. Don't jump in. Get him backed up against the cage slowly. You don't need to make him get there immediately with a jumping attack, because he will counter you. And we've seen it already. It was a beautiful check right hook counter, by the way. Like, this, something you can't take away from Islam Makhachev. He stood in there and, you know, it was beautiful. Very beautiful. Now, all right, now let me know down in the comments below if you think that I have missed anything, if you think some of these adjustments won't work, or that I'm just waffling about nonsense, or if you have some adjustments, suggestions of your own that you think Charles Oliveira might be able to do differently. Just to quickly recap, I think round kicks to the head, front kicks up the middle, because Islam won't catch him. He does not want to shoot a single leg. He wants to trip Charles Oliveira. Number 2, I want Charles Oliveira to either initiate a takedown so that Islam has to defend it and can't just, you know, create a good position for himself where he can get a trip. He needs to address something, and by virtue of that, you're able to get a better position for yourself so he can't take you down. And, or if you are going to get taken down, I would rather Charles Oliveira pull guard in open mat, then be taken down up against the cage where he's not able to work, he's not able to move and, you know, do shit off of his back. And the third and final one is cut that jumping shit out. I don't want to see it against other opponents. It's fine, dude. It don't matter against other opponents. Here it matters. You don't have the luxury of recovering off of your back because Islam's going to jump off of you. He's very defensively responsible off of the back foot, off of counters. He has very clean counters when he needs to. I would rather Charles Oliveira, again, as I said earlier, create a situation or a scenario where Islam Makhachev is forced to make a mistake rather than offering up a mistake for Islam Makhachev to capitalize on. Like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. I'll see you at the next video. Bye-bye.